listeners who read wills to families, what is the most interesting, bizarre, offensive, surprising thing you have had to read out loud? Story 1. To my daughter Anne, who created my beautiful granddaughter Jane, and her dear fourth husband John, who laid hands on my Jane, I leave $1 you money-grubbing bastards. To Jane, I leave all of my monetary assets, save $5,000 and my best gun, which I leave to my son Bill, on the condition that he beats John during the time between my funeral and my burial. Jane, bail your uncle out of jail, please. Other than names, this is the exact wording of a great-uncle's will, part of it anyway. At age 9, Jane told her mother that John had molested her, and her mother told her she deserved it for being a. So great-uncle took Jane in and raised her, and his 2 kids got exactly what it says. His son also got a truck and technically a house, although he only kept it until Jane was a legal adult and could afford the tax on it. Bill got full custody of Jane when his father died, and he put every penny of her money into a trust fund to mature when she was 25 because he felt like his sister would try to get the money. He was right. And in case anyone wondered, yes, Bill got his $5 grand. He didn't get arrested, though, because John had a warrant on him, so they didn't dare call the cops. Bill did kindly inform the police of his whereabouts a few weeks later. Story 2. When I was a clerk in law school at the State Court of Appeals, the adult children of a rich woman tried to invalidate the will. Basically, the woman was worth about $8 million, and all the children were working professionals earning 6 or 7 figures. Well, the woman had used the same hairdresser for multiple years and left a considerable amount in a trust for the hairdresser's children's education. The remainder of the estate was given to different charities. Basically, the kids were mad they didn't get a cut. Edit. A lot of people asking how it turned out. Truth is, I don't know. We remanded on some procedural issues and I never followed up on it. Story 3. My estate planning professor told us about a guy who had 2 families, neither of which knew about the other until it was time to read the will. This wasn't like a love child, mistress type scenario. Both were nuclear multi-kid families. Both families showed up for what had to be one of the most awkward will reading in history. I don't really know how he pulled it off other than that he was away on business frequently. Story 4. In my trusts and estates class in law school, we read a case about a man who left everything to his wife, but only if she got his body stuffed and left it on the living room couch forever. Luckily for her, the court invalidated that part of the husband's will. IIRC, part of the reasoning was that it would make it impossible for her to date or remarry if she had her husband's creepy dead body glaring at anyone who came to see her. Story 5. We had a client itemize his rock collection in his will, including directions that certain rocks be deposited in certain rivers across Canada. Edit. Apparently, I need to start watching this Breaking Bad show. Story 6. I used to work for an accountant, and we used to make wills as well. An old man, probably around 70, left all his money to his mistress, while his wife only got the goldfish. I had to tell him that if his wife contested it, she would most definitely win. He said he didn't care. Edit used to used X2. If there is a lawyer on this forum, can you please answer some of these questions? We did a little section on law while doing my accounting degree, and to my knowledge, the wife has a high chance of winning the case. Example, if all he had was furniture in the house and the house itself, then the wife would get it all regardless of what the will said. Just to clear up confusion, I'm for Australia, not USA. I thought it was in there, but it wasn't. Story 7 lawyer here. I once amended a will for a doctor in which he disinherited his son by removing everything he had intended to bequeath and replacing it with a manure spreader. I didn't ask any questions because changing a will is an easy thing to do. But one day, that doctor will die, and his son will have essentially be told to eat. Story 8. We had a client who was a widowed farmer who owned several heavy equipment, Caterpillar trucks, etc. He had 2 sons who were already working with him at the farm, and a daughter who was working in the city. He willed the heavy equipment to the daughter, when asked why, since these equipment were essential to the farm. He said that the farm was to go his kids equally, but his girl needed to know he always wanted her to join their venture and dispel her notions of alienation because she was a girl. Story 9. Not me, but my friend's father's father died, and he said when the guy reviewed the will with his lawyer and his sister, it said to give 100% of the assets to his sister. He said he had no idea why his father did that. He wasn't on bad terms or anything. It was shocking to him. The sister didn't share anything with him either, and they were on pretty good terms before that. Story 10. Oh dear. My first, not me, but a friend post. Someone had left an entire golf course that he owned and managed in secret to his son. They were avid golfers but always went to another course. I still don't know why someone would lie about owning a golf course. Story 11. I know you're looking for lawyers and whatnot, but here, have my mediocre will story anyway. My great-grandmother left her daughter just $1 and not a single penny more, so help me God. This was before I was born, but my grandmother, not the daughter with the dollar, said that when they all read the will, her sister had a full-blown temper tantrum and no one heard from her since. I guess she had it coming. Story 12. To my wife I leave her lover and the knowledge that I was never the fool she thought me. To my son, I leave the pleasure of working for a living. For 25 years, he thought the pleasure was all mine. Bestest ever. Was in my wills and trust book in law school as an example of people talking in their wills. You're supposed to discourage them as lawyers from doing so. Story 13. I was working as a legal secretary and had to leave someone's cats to various people. Fine. But I also had to leave money in the cat's name to various organizations. One of them was named Mr. Bobo. I enjoyed it thoroughly. Story 14. It's very rare to read a will out loud. That's mostly in the movies. Normally I just make extra copies and pass them out to whoever in the family wants to read it. Edit 1. Though the most unusually thing in a will I saw was man leaving a good chunk of money for his mistress that wife knew nothing about. It was interesting to see sadness and anger fighting to win in the wife. She finally laughed and said, "What a mother." Story 15. It went something like this. Frank, if your fat monkey heart is still beating, then congratulations. I want you to know that I hereby leave all of your money to Bruce Mathis, the real father of my children, a handsome man with a beautiful soul and a nicer penis. For my darling son Dennis, I give you my house on the sole condition that Frank is not be allowed in. Deandra, you get nothing. So, Story 16. I don't remember enough of the story, but there was a guy in the 1800s that left his estate to his great-grandchildren because he didn't want his actual children to benefit at all. I think they only recently received the money. Edit. Also, I don't think any actual lawyers can answer this because if it was bizarre enough to be noteworthy, they'd be giving up attorney-client privilege. Story 17. My maternal. Grandpa was wealthy. He divorced my maternal grandma, remarried, and promptly dropped dead of a heart attack. He was only 48 and had no will, so everything went to his new wife, my mom's stepmother. She was actually really nice and was planning on making sure that everything was fair, till she died in a car accident 6 months later. She was a widow herself prior to marrying Grandpa and had a now orphaned 15-year-old son from the previous marriage who got everything. My mom and her siblings had to go to the auction at their childhood home and buy back as much of their heirlooms and memories as they could afford, and truthfully, stole some of what they couldn't. Edit I know words. Story 18. My father-in-law was an accountant for some rather wealthy people. One of them was asking him to assist with writing up his will worth millions. The final addition he suggested was that if the children contested it, they get nothing. They contested it for years. Story 19. I got this weird light-catching thing from the old principal from my fucking charter school. It came in handy though and saved me and my friends' lives. Story 20. Best will story I personally know of. The father had a valuable antique grandfather clock. He also had 2 daughters. His solution: if I die on an even day, daughter A gets the clock, an odd day, and daughter B gets it. The daughter who did not get the clock got an equivalent cash award based on the value of the clock. I know of the event because I had to service the clock several times over the years. Story 21. An ancestor of mine in the rural UK in the 1700s died and left his farm and everything to his nephew, no children, with his surviving wife only getting the second best bed, and a provision her to receive 3 dollars of butter per week for the rest of her life. We thought this was incredibly mean, but we wonder whether this butter was meant as an income. I mean, who can eat 3 olabs of butter? Story 22. While the final decision as to the use of my body remains with PETA, I make the following suggested directions. A. That the meat of my body, or a portion thereof, be used for a human barbecue, to remind the world that the meat of a corpse is all flesh, regardless of whether it comes from a human being or another animal, and that flesh foods are not needed. B. That my skin, or a portion thereof, be removed and made into leather products, such as purses, to remind the world that human skin and the skin of other animals is the same, and that neither is fabric nor needed, and that some skin be tacked up outside the Indian Leather Fair each year to serve as a reminder of the government's need to abate the suffering of Indian bullocks who, after a life of extreme and involuntary servitude, as I have seen firsthand, are exported all over the world in this form. C. That, in remembrance of the elephant foot umbrella, stands and tiger rugs I saw, as a child, offered for sale by merchants at Connaught Place in Delhi, my feet be removed, and umbrella stands or other ornamentation be made from them, as a reminder of the depravity of killing innocent animals such as elephants, in order that we might use their body parts for household items and decorations. D. That one of my eyes be removed, mounted, and delivered to the administrator of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency as a reminder that PETA will continue to be watching the agency until it stops poisoning and torturing animals in useless and cruel experiments. That the other is to be used as PETA sees fit. That my pointing finger be delivered to Kenneth Feld, owner of Ringling Brothers, and Barnum and Bailey Circus, or to a circus museum to stand as the greatest accusation on earth on behalf of the countless elephants, lions, tigers, bears, and other animals who have been kidnapped from their families and removed from their homelands in India, Thailand, Africa, and South America, and deprived of all that is natural and pleasant to them, abused, and forced into involuntary servitude for the sake of cheap entertainment. That my liver be vacuum-packed and shipped, in whole or in part, to France, to there be used in a public appeal to persuade shoppers not to support the vile practice of force-feeding geese and ducks for foie gras. That one of my ears be removed, mounted, and sent to the Canadian Parliament to assist them in hearing, for the first time perhaps, the screams of the seals, bears, raccoons, foxes, and minks, bludgeoned, trapped, and sometimes skinned alive for their pelts. That the other ear be removed, preserved, and displayed outside the Deonar abattoir in Mumbai, to remind all who do business there that the screams of the cattle who are slaughtered within its walls are heard around the world. That one of my thumbs be removed, mounted upwards on a plaque, and sent to the person or institution that, in the year of my death or thereabouts, PETA decides has done the most to promote alternatives to the use and abuse of animals in any area of their exploitation. That one of my thumbs be mounted in a downward position, and sent to the person or institution that, in the year of my death or thereabouts, has gone against the changing tide of societal opinion and frightened and hurt animals in some egregious manner. That a little part of my heart be buried near the racetrack at Hockenheim, preferably near the Ferrari pits, where Michael Schumacher raced in and won the German Grand Prix. That anything else be done with my body that PETA believes will serve to draw attention to and so abate the plight of exploited animals. Story 23. Saw someone's moms will get read to them. Her ex-lover got all of her money and she gave her mansion to her son and gave her daughter nothing and said she was a disappointment and a mistake. The kicker was, though, the kids were twins. Story 24. Title Examiner here. I once read a will where the decedent left his presumably gay son the 12 feet of rope in my tool shed, so that can do us all a favor and hang himself. His words, not mine. There are some truly terrible people in this world. Story 25. One of my college buddies' dad died from cancer in our second year. It wasn't a sudden death. He had been battling it for a couple years. When my friend came back to school, he casually mentioned that his dad left him and his sister $7 million each. Turns out, his dad had hit the lottery before my friend was born. Invested, put all the money away to help pay for college or high school. His mom got a nice chunk of change also. He grew up thinking they were just ordinary middle-class family. We had a glorious third and fourth year of college, thanks to my loaded friend. He did know his dad won the lottery, but it was never mentioned to him or his sister that it was a lot of money. Story 26. I'm not a lawyer, but my family has an odd story involving a will. Several generations back, a woman, along with her brothers, in our family inherited a huge sum of money from her father, oil money, in Oklahoma. At the time, women were allowed to inherit property assets if single, but all assets would have been transferred to her husband if she married. She wasn't too happy about the situation, and in protest never took a husband. She had a few friends over the course of her life and lived a very comfortable life until dying of old age, at which time her estate was divided amongst all of the female descendants in the family. My great-great-great-aunt of something was a bad feminist. Typos. Story 27. Not a lawyer, but an estate planning paralegal for many years. I've read, drafted, or executed thousands of wills and trusts with clients. My first nitpicky comment is that the common belief that lawyers actually assemble the whole family and hold a reading of the will is entirely a construct of TV. You would never sit there and just read a will to people. It's mostly a bunch of legalese about bonds and payment of taxes and the powers of the executor. Only a very small portion of the will actually pertains to distributions, and in many cases it's just a paragraph stating that everything goes to the spouse if living, otherwise equally to the kids, or to the trust, which then says it all goes to spouse then kids. Believe it or not, they're usually pretty mundane. When strings are attached, it's usually just parents trying to make sure their kids go to college or they get a smaller distribution, or just have to wait longer to get their money. People who don't have kids usually name about 24 beneficiaries, which is cumbersome and annoying. especially since a lot of times they don't even have much money to divide. People with kids almost always just leave the money to them equally. Probably the most fucked up thing I've seen is a couple different clients who included provisions to disinherit kids and grandkids if they married a black person. That's their prerogative and we'll serve them professionally. But we tended not to get too cozy or chatty at those signings, unlike with many of the nice clients with whom we would become friendly. Just get them in. Get them out in those cases. Story 28. Well, my father's an attorney, not an estate attorney. But anyway, in my boyfriend's living will, he has instructions that his ashes be shot out of a cannon. Edit. Not living will. That's a different thing. Story 29. I'm late. Bye maybe. My father is an heir to the Procter & Gamble company. Just so we are clear, I am not rich. Anyway, my grandfather was adopted with his brother by two spinster sisters, part of the P&G family. Had an elevator in his house, the whole 9 yards. My grandfather went to the war, was part of the Battle of the Bulge, and came back completely shell-shocked. He began drinking and partying, etc. When the sisters died, everything was left to his brother, assuming my grandfather would drink away the money. My grandfather was left a small general store to support his family, a small home, and a car. He cleaned up his act and sought counseling when they figured out PTSD, and his brother gave him nothing and never spoke to him after he was better. The brother once purposely crossed the street so he would not have to speak to my father, his nephew. Story 30 tons. One client left a specific gift of 10K to one son and left him out of the per stripes division of the residual estate, which was sizable at the time the will was drafted. This was intended as a serious disinheritance, which he apparently talked about all the time to make the disfavored son feel bad. However, by the time he died, he had a serious reversal of fortune, and his estate was about 10K, so he effectively disinherited the good children and left the black sheep everything. The bad kid appeared very poor, compared to the others, and the look of grateful surprise on the poor kid's face was almost as priceless as the shock on the others who thought they were getting rich. I heard this from another lawyer. Rich old lady leaves her entire sizable estate in a trust for the care and maintenance of her dog, as long as the dog shall live. On the dog's death, the trust paid out in full to the son. Apparently, the son had Rover put down the day after the funeral and presented a demand to the trustee the very next day for the trust payout. She should have seen that one coming. Story 31. My mom's father left her and her 3 sisters $1 out of spite. $1. Just don't leave anything, you fucking. Edit. My grandfather was very well off from being a successful insurance salesman. He left his wife and 4 daughters to start a new life with another woman and her daughters way before I was born. Story 32. My grandfather, a Vietnam War veteran, suffered from PTSD. It got worse in his later years, and he would often isolate himself from the rest of the family, often hiding out in his bedroom when visitors were over. My grandmother would often tell us stories about how he had inherited a significant amount of money from his father way back when. She said that in their younger years he often spent his inheritance on luxurious dates and trips. After returning from war, he spent the remaining money on a house in which he and my grandmother settled and raised their children. Fast forward to his death, just a couple months back, and we found out he had written a will. Even my grandmother didn't know about it. We all had assumed he wouldn't have much to leave since most of the money he had saved from his time in the military was going towards taking care of him as he was placed in a care facility as his PTSD worsened. His will told of a warehouse in Township, Michigan that held a large collection of vintage cars. He said that the warehouse was passed down from his father, and he had all the documents to prove that he was the owner of some type of warehouse. His will estimated that the cars be worth in excess of $2 million total. The money from his collection would be split between his 4 children. We had no idea this collection ever existed. My father and his 3 brothers had all grown up in Plano, Texas. None of us had ever been to Michigan before. Even our mother couldn't recall a time of our father ever having even gone to visit Michigan. After a long debate, my father and I, the only ones who could manage to find some time off from work, agreed to fly out to Michigan to see this collection firsthand. After a few $1,000s spent on plane tickets, hotels, etc., we finally arrived at the warehouse my grandfather owned. It was a rundown warehouse, but it was tucked away within a compound of other warehouses that seemed to be otherwise well taken care of. Finally, code in hand, my father punched the numbers into the keypad, and the giant door began to rise. What was inside was beyond words. There was absolutely nothing. Besides a few homeless people that managed to sneak in through a hole in the corrugated metal around back, there was no car collection. We were able to contact a few owners of the neighboring warehouses, and to their knowledge, no one and nothing had ever been inside of those warehouses in the years they had been there. To this day, we don't know what happened. We all just assume that the PTSD caused him to create some kind of fantasy in his mind, that maybe he purchased the warehouse believing it was a safe house for him if he ever needed to get out of Plano. Story 33. One summer, I worked as an administrative assistant to a lawyer who worked in wills and estates. Most of it was the usual petty arguing about percentages of money, but one couple was deeply concerned about which of their children would receive the urn with the ashes of the family's long-deceased cat. Wouldn't want to play favorites. Story 34. Not exactly a reading of the will story, but in the same realm. When I was like 20, my dad told me that when he died, I would be getting a chunk of money. Not millions, but enough to do something good with. Years later, he and my mom separated. He met a new woman and got married. After talking to my brother and sister, we were all worried that she would change his will or get him to change it in favor of her kids. We agreed that we didn't want money, but just wanted any final wishes to be honored. The money couldn't hurt, though. Sadly, after that, he got cancer and died 2 years ago. After he died, my siblings and I agreed to just accept however his widow divided anything. She made sure things went where he had decided. My percentage was smaller because he had added her and her children. In the 2 years since he passed, she hasn't talked to us much. She calls for holidays and stuff. She tries, but she is just kinda awkward. She's also sent large sums of money on 2 occasions because she sold some land he owned. She has shown me and my siblings that there are still good people. Sure, she might have kept most of the money, but she could have kept all of the money and we would never have known. Story 35 years ago, worked in a retirement community. Older man we knew was gay, developed a late-in-life relationship, and moved into the community with his gay lover. He was a Korea vet, multiple honors, a wall of medals. He was also a bit of an most days, but he had moments over a meal. His stories were fantastic. His children over 3 years never once visited him. He had a heart attack and knew he was going to die. His children showed up but demanded his lover leave for visits. In his will, he left everything to his lover, and his lover's one child from a former marriage. He wrote a long note about his kids' hypocrisy of not visiting, and their attitudes toward his lover. He left each of his 2 kids a pail of coal ash to be deducted from his estate, had his estate pay for his lover's plot to be next to him and his wife, and in his long letter that his kids, if they visited him in his death, would be reminded of why they didn't visit while he was alive. It was, frankly, awesome hearing his kids blow up about it. Edited to clarify a term I used. Story 36. Once I had to give a $3 million estate to an autistic man with assisted living. It was really a trust fund to the person running the institution. His brother only got a car with some sort of sentimental value. Turns out the guy who got the car didn't know that he even had a brother. I wonder what happened with them. Story 37. Not a lawyer, but sort of a sad story. When my dad's mother died, her will stipulated that everything was to be liquidated and the money distributed equally between her children and grandchildren. Fine. But literally, everything had to be sold. There were family heirlooms, jewelry, things my grandfather, a carpenter, had made. So many sentimental family things that my father and his siblings badly wanted, but it all had to be sold. They all went to the auction to try to buy some of the more sentimental items but weren't always successful. It was heartbreaking, and I'm not sure what made my grandmother think it would be a good idea. Nobody wanted the money. They wanted her wedding ring and the clocks my grandfather had made and all that. Story 38. When my grandparents on my mother's side were dying of cancer, my uncle, black sheep, piece of the family who I've never met, thank God, wanted to know what he was getting from the inheritance when they died. Not, how's mom and dad, or what can I do to help? My grandparents, being the people they were still going to give him an inheritance after all the fucked up things he did to them, but my mom, the power of attorney, convinced them that they shouldn't be manipulated by him anymore. They ended up writing him an email back telling him that he wouldn't be included in the will anymore. He ended up threatening to burn their house down, my house down, killing me and my family, etc. for betraying him. And you know what my grandparents did? They ended up including him in the will and sending him exactly 1 penny in check form by mail. That was the last time I have heard from him since. Story 39. Me and my wife went to a lawyer to have our wills drafted. The lawyer told us of a client he had that had a great deal of money. His kids were fighting over it before he was dead. The man liked the monkey exhibit and the local zoo. He liked to just watch them all the time. When he died, the lawyer had to tell his family he willed all of his money and estate to the zoo for the monkey exhibits. He now has a bench dedicated to his honor at one of the local zoos. He said they were livid and tried to fight. Lesson is, don't be petty and greedy, love your family unconditionally. Edit. Autocorrect. Story 40. My grandfather hated his neighbor. They lived next to each other for 20+ years. I remember well my grandfather raging at every opportunity about this guy. We never saw them speak to each other. In Grandpa's will, he left the guy $10K, a car, and golf clubs. We were dumbstruck. Turns out they were good buddies from the army. When they coincidentally bought homes next to each other, they decided to play a long scam with both their families. They actually played golf together 2 to 3x per week and had a monthly poker game for years. Story 41. Before I was a lawyer, I had a part-time gig sifting through probate records for unclaimed assets. No specific file sticks out, but I think 1 in 50 or so records had really explicit notes regarding why so-and-so was left out of the will. Story 42. When my great-uncle died, he left his beloved dog to his longtime girlfriend. All of his money went into a pet trust for said dog, which turned out to be quite a large sum of money. His 2 kids got nothing. As far as I know, he didn't have a bad relationship with them or anything. He just thought the world of his little dog. Story 43. The Great Stork Derby was a contest during the period from 1926 to 1936, where women in Toronto, Canada, competed to produce the most babies in order to qualify for an unusual bequest in a will. The race was the product of a scheme by Toronto lawyer, financier, and practical joker Charles Vance Miller, who bequeathed the residue of his significant estate to the woman in Toronto who could produce the most children in a 10-year period after his death. A decision of the Supreme Court of Canada interpreted the relevant clause and held that it was valid. The winning mothers were Annie Catherine Smith, Kathleen Ellen Nagel, Lucy Alice Timlick, and Isabel Mary McLean. Each of them received $125,000 for their 9 children. 2 others each received $12,500 out of court. Lillian Kenny, 10 children, but 2 stillborn, and Pauline May Clark, 10 children, 5 set of twins, but several were children of a father to whom she was not married, which at that time was considered legally relevant. Story 44. Reading all of this, I hope that my parents spend all their money while they are alive so me and my family never have to fight over anything. It's so not worth it. Story 45. My will has something unusual. Story time. I sat my wife down to have the talk because I was getting ready to deploy to Iraq. This was during the incredible sectarian violence, and I wanted to make sure she knew everything to do in case I died. She's never serious, ever, but I wanted her to be serious for this discussion because it was damned important. I get through telling her all about it and want to know if she has questions. Yeah, so, the life insurance. How does that work? She says. I don't really know, baby. What do you mean? She answers. Well, do they just put the money in there? When? Look, she's not trying to be in right. It's not like she's just dying for the money. She wants to know the logistics of it. I'm sitting here thinking when she says, so do they put in my bank account? Or do they give you one of those big checks when you win the lottery? As she holds her hands up like she's holding a huge check, laughter ensues. I have it written into the will that if I'm KIA, I want the $400K to be given to her with a gigantic lottery check. Have base photo, bring several folks over, shoot like the paparazzi as she stands on a stage, and do it. LOL. Edit. Fixed some spelling errors. Story 46. When I was 16, my dad wrote me out of his will and then hung himself in the garage. It was few months after my older brother had died in a car wreck. Funny thing is, we always got along. I was then kicked out of the house by his wife, without a single thing that was mine. It was on Christmas Eve, so I went to my mom's for a night, and when I came back to my dad's, the locks were changed. Not a single shirt, not a shoe, not a sock, nothing but the cloths on my back and the change in my pocket. Story 47. This will probably get buried now, but I worked with trusts and estates for many years. One of my favorites was from a widower whose wife had died some 20 years earlier. After her death, he wanted to travel the country in a motorhome but was too grieved to do so. Years later, his old army buddy's wife died and they re-established their friendship in their retirement years. He finally bought the motorhome he'd dreamed of and left with his buddy to travel the continent, which they did for many years. After he passed away, he left a new motorhome to his buddy, but with one stipulation. The buddy was required to mount a set of 6-foot longhorns on the hood of the rig before it would become his. It sounded like a Texan versus non-Texan dispute they'd had for many years. Absolutely brilliant, and seemed like an amazing friendship. I would have loved to hear their traveling adventures over the years. Edit. I just remembered he'd also left his sister just 2 cents, and to tell her that he would finally get his 2 cents in. Story 48. There is one famous device in a will from New York. A rich man left everything to his wife, provided she remarried. The will supposedly had the explanation that the testator put this condition on the will because he wanted to make sure at least one person truly mourned his death. Story 49. A really nice guy in my area was killed, and no one could figure out why anyone would want to kill him. Turns out he was the caretaker of his mentally challenged brother, who resented having to ask for advances on his trust money. The brother did it. Story 50. Not a lawyer, but happened with my family. My grandfather-in-law's daughter tried to change his will without him knowing about it. After he passed, they were all gathered at the reading. The only thing he left her was a really nice bronze sculpture of the devil, or Pan, playing the flute. Story 51. On behalf of my dad here, he one time had a woman leave millions of dollars to 3 stray cats that she had been feeding, and he had to go catch them and put them in crates to be shipped to Texas, where they live a life of luxury in a cat resort. Another guy had a safety deposit box that was massive, like the size of a small dresser. Inside it was filled with coins that they had to count. Turns out it was several $100,000 worth of coins. Story 52. My sister spent a couple years working for a long-standing organization in Philly that's been accepting bequeathments since the late 18th century. Her job was to help organize the various trusts they had to administer, as well as going around advising people not to do things like this and just leave them a lump sum. People had a habit of leaving them an annual trust. That $5 year was a princely sum in 1813, but by now it's just a complete nuisance. Or of leaving them ridiculously specific things to do every year. The worst example I remember, I'm a little fuzzy on the details, was a woman who left funds to purchase books for school children in Liberia. Problem is, her funds now don't buy more than a couple books, and she left instructions for someone to deliver the books, not to ship them. Story 53. Readings aren't typical with wills. Those are mostly a Hollywood thing. Still, sometimes the will specifies a reading, usually, at least I've found, when the deceased wants to screw someone in front of the rest of the family. The strangest and most embarrassing reading was in a room crowded with relatives when a man who died fairly young, massive heart attack, early 50s, left absolutely everything to his 26-year-old stepdaughter, which was quite a lot of money and property. 2 ex-wives and children from the first marriage got nothing, nor did siblings, nieces, nephews, etc. The will specified that a DVD be played to explain why the stepdaughter was getting everything. Like everyone else, I thought it'd be the guy explaining the big U to the rest of the family. What followed was completely unexpected. It was a hidden camera recording of the guy and his stepdaughter, at about age 15, having wild, which they both were very clearly enjoying. The video started in mid-coitus, with her screaming, "Yes, oh God, yes!" It had obviously been edited to start with maximum shock value, and it worked, because it took about 30 seconds for me to recover enough to turn the thing off. Definitely the biggest holy moment of my career. I later learned that the guy and his stepdaughter had been having since she was 14, all the way to when he died, when she was 26. Apparently, though this is secondhand and I can't confirm, there were multiple clips of various video bits through the ages on the DVD. At the end of the DVD, the guy explains that the stepdaughter gets everything because she'd been the best of his life. Worst part, the will specified that I was to give every single family member their own copy of the DVD. The copies had been kept in a box and had been distributed prior to the showing, so everyone had the best moments of in their hands at the time the DVD was playing. Epilogue. The family sued and lost, believe it or not. The girl got to keep everything.